When I was younger, I thought that if I could just bicycle a little bit faster, I could get all the things done that needed to be done. And somewhere along the way, I got a little bit older and wiser and slower and smarter. And I realized that the bicycle I was on only had so many gears, and I needed to find a new way to thrive. And this week's podcast is all about that. It's about the one thing that all leaders must do. So I want to give credit to Gary Keller, who wrote a book called The One Thing. It has been on my bookshelf. I've reread it over the years, and I was recently reading it for a mastermind group that I was in. And it is so powerful in the message it delivers. Basically, the whole book can be distilled into this one statement. Find the one thing in any situation that will allow you to produce extraordinary results. And this works in your personal life as well as your professional life. And what it reminds you is your job as a leader is to prioritize. Your job as a leader is to simplify. Don't make it more complicated. Life is very complicated already. Make it simple. And so our roles as communicators and prioritizers are really some of the most important pillars in our strategic brain. Many folks that come to me are looking to move into the senior leadership suite. And one of the things they'll often say is, I've been told I need to think more strategically. And they're kind of scratching their head trying to figure out what that means. And to me, what it means is you've gotten caught on this hamster wheel of to-dos and tasks and activities. And to be part of that senior leadership suite, you need to start thinking about the strategy, the overall goal, the umbrellas, rather than the actual tasks themselves. The idea of getting hyper focused on a few specific things, getting rid of the bing, ping, ring, tings, and et ceteras in your world, which is harder and harder for us to do. So one of the pieces that is part of this is, as a woman leader, we tend to be more wired for people pleasing. We have had success in the past by relational experiences with others. And so when someone asks us for something, we say yes, or we find a way to make it happen. And after I say this statement about emails and inboxes, you will never see them the same. That email and those inboxes that you have on your computers right now, all of you have inboxes, are full of everybody else's tasks that they need from you, right? Very rarely are those emails that come to you about your priorities, your mandate, your strategic decisions. And so one of the messages here for the one thing is figure out what the one thing is for you to be successful rather than making other people look good. You've heard that theme from me on this podcast, helping number twos become number ones in work and life. And there are these cycles in any organization or any growth chain, and they goes like this. You start with the grow, right? You grow, you expand, operations expands with you. It's a bit pell-mell, but you make it there. It might be targets for revenue, products, whatever it is, impact, etc. And then you get to this plateau where you kind of regroup and reorganize yourselves. And then there's this moment when you realize that to be successful, you need to streamline and you need to simplify. And this is what I'm talking about with the one thing. Rather than having 12 different technology platforms, can you have one? Rather than having multiple places for pipeline, can you have one? Rather than having 12 different ways to have prospect development, can you simplify? Where are the twofers? Where are the double dips? Where are the places that are getting the most bang for your buck? And I'm here to tell you, not everyone slows down enough to take stock and take a look at that. And that is incredibly important and powerful. So back to this cycle thing. We've got the grow, we've got the plateau, and then we've got the streamline. And the smart leaders, the smart business people take that pause right there for reflection. And then they go back into growth mode. because growth and change is basically inevitable. We are always in a cycle. It's not like anything we do anymore is stagnant. And in some ways, the pandemic has just sort of increased the pace of change, which is, I think, why we're all feel like we have whiplash. But this pattern of growth, plateau, streamline, reflection, and then grow again is super duper important for not only knowing what you're good at, not only for getting efficient at things, because when you're more efficient at things, you can do more things. You can, in technology, they talk about crawl, walk, run. You crawl first, you figure out how it works, and then you walk and you incorporate all those things, and then you run. Nobody would want to shift over all of their software platforms at once. Nobody would want to move from the old hospital to the new hospital all at once. And so part of this is also being okay with the effort that you're putting in. Let me kind of unpack that for a second. So one thing that streamlining does is it forces you to determine and prioritize what's most important. And so many of us, dear listeners, don't want to do that. We actually would rather stay in the chaos of trying to do it all than figure out where the most bang for your buck is and streamline things. And so this exercise of, okay, the final outcome, what is the one thing that is non-negotiable that must happen in your shop? And you might be listening saying, there's no way, Jenny, I can't simplify what I do into one thing. I'm here to say, you can do it and try, put it on paper. What is the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary? How about if you put that bar to it? And that, again, is a Gary Keller quote. I want to honor that. But part of this is, what is the root? What is the essence? What must always happen in order for the shop, the organization, and your leadership to follow on? And some of these anchors in this theory are things like, not everything matters equally. So you as a leader must train your attention. And I use the word train, like genuinely train your attention to focus on the most important things. And it's hard at the beginning because I know from myself, let me back out and tell a story. I will gravitate to my inbox or to my quick to-do list because it's got dopamine behind it, especially if it's something simple and I can be a hero and I can respond. When you look at the habits of great leaders, they leverage their number twos, they leverage their teams to do that simple, straightforward work that they can't, that anyone else can do for them. But they focus on the stuff that is really, really high value tasks for them. So one of the suggestions here is get rid of anything that isn't absolutely mission critical that you can't do. So do only the mission critical stuff that is yours. Simplify that down. Another way to put this, achievers work from a clear sense of purpose and priority. So achievement is about taking stock, making an analysis, quick, fast, however, and going through it and going through all the way to the end. Another habit I see of ineffective leaders is they start down a path, they make a decision, good for them, or they make a priority, or they have a strategic plan, but then they sort of change the plan halfway through or they backtrack. Now, often that happens because of circumstances and threats and opportunities in the market, but often that happens because they change their mind and they never fully committed to the activity. Let me give you an example. You can be following along with a pipeline, you can be following along with prospects, but if you change your criteria for those prospects midway, before you've gotten to the end of the list, you can't really analyze whether those prospects are your best ones or not because you don't have a data sample set to make it work. So making sure you're figuring out as a leader what the priority is, where you start, where you finish, and how you will analyze success is crucially important. Back to my pleasers. Oh, my pleasers, the people in the audience who want to do the right thing and want to help everyone in the world. I have a strong, courageous conversation message for you. Despite the best of intentions, you will not be able to accomplish everything you set out to do. And so the only thing you can do is ditch the things, or I should say, make a decision on the things you will not do. sometimes that's actually harder than deciding what you will do, because I know what it feels like. Right now, I'm in a place where I no longer speak for free. It's not something that's part of my mandate. I have enough. I have enough pipeline from other places. So, but gracefully turning down someone to come and be part of a community, because I love community, to help someone with a stage or a concept or share some of my knowledge, those are things I love to do. But by saying no to that, to free speaking, I say yes to space in my calendar for new one-on-one clients, for my Penthouse Women's Group, for all the other things that I'm inviting in. But if it is a finite amount, leaders only have so much time a week. And so how they choose to spend that time sincerely matters. So training your attention, first of all, identifying what your high value tasks are. If you don't know what that is, start writing them down as we listen to this podcast. You might also I did an uncut. Those are my new shorter versions that I'm doing every second week on the podcast. Loving those. And if you have any feedback on that, let me know. I'd love to hear whether they're totally jamming for you or if you have some suggestions for me. So I did an uncut called, what was it called? How to set up a time audit. It was 6.1. And there are some other ways that on the podcast, I also talk about Goodbye Perfection with Humayra Kabir. That's a great conversation about mindset, which is one of the things that's holding you back from making these strong, committed decisions. And also the podcast called Giving Yourself Permission to Do the Big Thing. That's also a great listen for you if this is resonating with you and you're feeling really anxious or nervous about dropping things off your roster. Controlling your own attention is probably one of the hardest things to do, especially for me, who's an Enneagram 7, which means I just want to do everything and experience it all. And what I'm learning in time, and one of my antidotes to that has been allowing myself to savor and experience the things that I am having. Rather than sort of finishing something and hopping on to the next one, I'm really training my attention to stay where it is most needed. Here's a good example. Today, I've got a house full of people. I got kids home for March break, and I know we'll listen to this recording a little bit later, but there's a lot going on. But I knew that my single most important thing to do today was to sit here and share this content for the podcast. And the reason is I know what's coming up. There's a bunch of travel, and it gets hard for me to get quiet and share my thoughts. And so I wrote a 3-list thing. Podcast is number 1 on my list because it's a high value task. Nobody else can do it for me. I have a great team that runs with this afterwards. But if I committed to the podcast, which is a central piece of my marketing plan for this coming year, then I need to hold myself accountable to prioritizing, let's call it a big rock instead of the small pebbles. This theme of prioritization flows through all the different business books. If you've read the book Traction, it talks about big rocks and small rocks and making sure that when you're filling your mason jar, you put the big rocks in first because the little rocks can fit in elsewhere. You might have heard of Radical Candor, another book that talks about how you need to really focus on what's most important. And this is not easy. Willpower is a finite amount of energy, and you need to find ways to reinforce and reward yourself. I absolutely think about the breaks I'm going to take. I absolutely use my phone to focus in for 25 minutes on one specific task, especially if it's a task I particularly dislike. Okay. So you're ditching the to-do list and you're focusing on outcomes and successes. This is a mind shift from tasks and activities to outcomes, outputs, and change making. I'm actually going to say change making for change makers. So you can move things around on your to-do list and feel like you've done something, but if you haven't changed the strategy, the approach, the inflection point, it doesn't matter. What's a good example? So you can build the best, just using my old world, you can build the best employee giving campaign the world has ever seen. But if you're not strategically addressing the outcome, which is a better relationship between your philanthropy department and the hospital that you work for, That doesn't matter. The employee giving campaign doesn't matter. Or similarly, if you can't find ambassadors to help support that campaign, to be champions for it within the hospital organization, if you haven't found your people, then there's no point. It doesn't matter how great your copy is. You have to go to the one thing that'll make the change. And that also is where you allow yourself to be okay with the effort you are putting in. In the past, and you'll remember my very first episode of this season was about the workaholic Jenny. In the past, I sort of threw myself at things equally important. So just threw the same amount of energy at things. And as I grow the gift of being older, this energy is probably one of my most valuable assets as a leader, and I need to dole it out carefully and thoughtfully. So when I make that strategic decision, it allows me to be okay with the effort I put in here and the less effort I put in there. I want to pick up on visualizing and creating and mindset. Many of the things you'll be doing as a strategic leader are uncharted. They've never been done before, and that's why they hired you, right? And you'll remember in the book, Embracing Ambition, I had 3 stories in the visionary section of that book. And if you don't have the book, go grab it. Or if you have the book, go and read those stories, because they're always about a vision that a leader has that other people don't see yet. And so you're fighting a bit of an upstream battle because they're not there with you yet. And so all they're doing is putting up obstacles. But what if this? But what if that? They're worried about this. They're worried about that. And it can be very disheartening as a visionary leader, right? But your job is to articulate and continuously and continually communicate that end goal that you're going towards, what it'll look like, what it'll feel like. If you're feeling, a little soft, or you're starting to doubt, my invitation to you on this podcast is to get quiet. Listen in, start describing and visualizing for yourself what it will feel like. Sometimes I find taking notes works. Sometimes I find just sitting quietly. Sometimes I find just asking myself, what is the desired end state here? Why am I doing all this? Do you see how this fits into the one thing? Rather than kind of flailing and throwing ideas, what's the place I want to get to? And then you can map it back from there. The other barrier to success for elevated leadership is this concept of multitasking and being in multiple files at once. Multitasking, first of all, does not exist. The research tells us that when we are trying to do 2 things, we do both of them half-assed. It does not work, despite best of intentions. My analogy is always, think about your phone battery. Think about what it's like when you flip-flop between 2 different apps on your phone. What happens to the battery? It starts to die. It starts to fade. It starts to be exhausted, right? Well, the research will tell us that it takes from, 20 seconds to 2.5 minutes to change tasks when you change files and portfolios on things you're working on. So it's not just a matter of, I'll just check that email or I'll just respond to that, because you're losing another 2.5 minutes of your productivity. And it'll probably take you another 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes to get back in where you were. So honor your attention, honor your focus. What did I say? I wrote it down. Control your own attention. Really, really focus in on what you are putting your energy and effort behind. My final thought for you in this podcast about the one thing is choice. It's a theme of this whole season. If you must choose what is important and stick to it, you must finish the sequence so that you can measure it. Everyone has 8 hours in the day, and fine if you're working 9 hours, 10 hours, go back and listen to my Workaholic podcast. But not every task is created equally, and you need to decide where you're putting that energy. And that is a choice that you as a leader can make. On a personal note, this year, when I think about the one thing, I thought about the business of Chavender and how I could streamline is my word, by the way, for this year, how I could streamline my efforts and my energy to have the same outputs with less effort. Isn't that what we all desire, whether we're in leadership, whether we're cleaning our house, whether we're working on relationships, whether we're with our children? We want to have the minimum amount of energy inputted for the maximum amount of return. So by definition, you got to streamline. You got to figure out what's working and you got to ditch what isn't. And if that is hard for you, I'd like you to notice and ask yourself, why is that hard, right? I talk about compassionate leadership on this podcast. What is hard about leading yourself to your next level, your next iteration? What do you have to shed, let go of, and embrace? So there's two parts, right? There's towards, and there's also dropping or releasing those things that no longer serve you. I'm going to take a pause. What's coming up for you? Just take a second before we turn off this podcast and we get to the end. What is it time to let go of? What is it time to lean into? What are those high value one thing tasks that you must absolutely be incorporating into your week? I know for me, one of those is exercise. I've said this before on the podcast. It really helps my mental wellness, my mental health, and makes everything else easier. And when I exercise, I find I eat better. When I exercise, I find I sleep better. When I exercise, I have more patience for my clients, for my family. Do you see how that is a great example of a one thing? And I discovered that, of course, by not exercising and seeing how crappy I feel and the implications of that. So that's on a personal level. What is it on a professional level at work that is the one thing? And how will you make a choice and take ownership for that? It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you for this podcast experience. Thank you for being part of my one thing today. I can move on to the other things. And if you have time, go back and listen to those other podcasts. I really invite you to kind of do a deep dive. If you've made it this far, I do think you'd like the other podcasts about time audits, that's 6.1, and the Goodbye Perfection, which is just a fantastic, iconic podcast that I love. You've already heard, I think, in the show notes information about the retreat that's coming up for Chavender. I am so delighted to be proposing and bringing forth this retreat at the intersection of life and leadership. I've always wanted to do this concept of wellness and retreat rather than conference, community rather than networking, intimate rather than massive. And I believe I've got the perfect formula, the right kind of experts and guests. And I do hope you'll be part of our world and go find out more information about the Embracing Ambition retreat happening in September of 2025. Thank you for listening. Go be great. What's your one thing?